Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to be counting down my top 10 favorite TNG episodes. If you're following along with the channel or you're familiar with us, you know that we do a podcast where we're covering all the Star Trek episodes, and I do, after each season that we wrap up, I do a best and the worst of each, top 5 best and the worst of each season. So I finished my TNG run. If you're more interested in an in-depth look at what my thoughts are about the best episodes across the 7 seasons of TNG, I'd recommend looking at those videos. This one is just going to be a very short list video type thing where I'm going to go through and just list off my top 10 because a listener had asked that I do that. But if you're more interested in sort of a analysis of the better episodes and the worst episodes for each season, you can check out those videos. There'll be a link in the video description. But this will be a simple list. I'm not going to go too much detail about each of the episodes. It's really just say kind of the way I thought about this is that I generally have my ratings after I watch all the episodes. So these are all very good episodes that I rated very highly. They're mostly 5s. I can't imagine that there's not any 5s. And then the 5 is the highest on my scale. The 5s are there, and then I kind of sorted them based on a combination of why I think they're important and how much I enjoy watching them. So they're all great episodes. It's really, once you get into the nuts and bolts of it, it's really just kind of personal preference about which ones I would prefer watching and which ones I think are more important than other ones. Which ones would I lose? Like if you were to go down the list, I'd probably drop off one. Like starting with 10, I would rather have number 9 than number 10, and I could afford to lose number 10. That's kind of how I rated it. But anyway, we'll start it off with honorable mentions. Chain of Command, Family, Drumhead, Royale, and Q-Who. The funny thing about the honorable mentions is that I would never really watch any of these episodes if I had a list in front of me of things to do, but they're like strong 4s or weaker 5s in my opinion. Like they're very good episodes that are maybe not rewatchable in a lot of the sense. Like Chain of Command I don't find very rewatchable. It's a very good episode. Family is the same way. The Drumhead is kind of the same way. It's more profound than actually good. Royale is very entertaining. It's an early season 2 episode, and the Q-Who is important because of the Borg and Q and everything like that. So that's it. Let's get started with the countdown here. Number 10 is The Survivors. It's episode 3 of season 3. I think it's the first great episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. Season 3 is where the show really picked up. I think it's the best season, in my opinion, out of all of them, followed by season 6. But The Survivors was the first one that really had a sort of moral ending that was really profound and impactful, and the sci-fi aspect of it was really great. It's a good episode to rewatch. It really feels like a new kind of show after season 2. It just been season 1 and 2 in TNG had just been a reboot and a rewarmed rehash of TOS. The Survivors actually felt like the morality of TOS transplanted into a newer series that was going to do things differently. So number 10 is The Survivors. Number 9 is Tapestry. I'm going to look here to see if what I say holds up. Not really. Tapestry is one of the better Q episodes anyway. I can't say it's the best Q episode, but it's one of the better Q episodes that, if you're familiar with the podcast, you know that the best Q episodes in our opinions are the ones that actually have him showing something to the characters instead of being just a pain in the ass or a trickster god. Episodes that allow him to use his powers to teach you something or teach the characters something are always going to be better than the episodes that don't do that. And I think Tapestry is one of the better examples of that. It's a really great look at Picard's past. You learn a lot about him. You learn about what made him the man he is. Has a nice jump forward where he's not in command. The changes that he has gone through in his past have obviously affected his future. And he realizes that he's not the man he would be without all the bad things that he regrets about what he did when he was growing up. Tapestry, number 9. Number 8 is Second Chances, which is maybe kind of a dark horse here. I really like Second Chances. I think it's one of the better episodes of season 6. It's a really great character work for Riker and Troy. It's probably Troy's best episode, and it's not even her episode. And it has a really cool sci-fi thing, and that's a spin-off of the transporter technology. What makes you you? If the transporter were to make a copy of you, is it actually you or is it something else? It's that whole philosophical discussion. And I think that it works really well. It's a nice season 6 episode because it sort of wraps up a storyline, the Riker and Troy relationship, and even though they get married later on, but it feels like it's a kind of ending for that relationship or that storyline, and it just has really great sort of ethical question about things. And someone I read an article recently that called TNG a philosophical procedural, and I think that's a really sort of brilliant description of what the show is, and I think Second Chances is a good example of that. It's episode 24 of season 6. Number 7 is All Good Things, the series finale. It's episode 25 and 26 of season 7. It's one of the better series finales of all time. It really accomplishes what it sets out to do. It remains true to the series and what it had been for 7 years. It wraps up everything. It has a really clever storyline that, while it's not sort of transcendent in its story, it is very effective, and it's satisfying both on like a finale level and as an episode of the show, which is kind of rare for a season or a series finale. I think All Good Things does a very good job of riding that line. So it's number 7. It's All Good Things. Number 6 is Sarek. It is episode 23 of season 3. Sarek is one of the more emotional episodes of this. It helps to be familiar with the character from TOS, but I don't think it needs it as long as you understand the Vulcan angle. One of the better scenes in the series, I think, at least acting-wise, is Patrick Stewart after he's inherited Sarek's sort of loss of mental stability, when he has to mind meld with Sarek in order to allow Sarek to finish a diplomatic mission or whatever the hell he's doing in that episode. So Picard sort of takes on the mental disease that is ravaging Sarek and causing him to lose control. It has a really great scene where Picard plays out that whole thing. It's really great insight into a character that we've known for so long, that we're familiar with through the TOS series and the movies. And it's just a nice sort of next-gen take on a TOS storyline. It's a very effective way to do that, and they weren't very effective at doing that earlier, but this is the show learning how to actually handle things like that. Number 6, Sarek. Number 5 is Cause and Effect, which is probably the most quote-unquote hard sci-fi best narrative in that sense. Like on a pure sci-fi level, I think the Cause and Effect is one of TNG's best episodes. I never get old watching it, even though it should, because it's the same thing repeating over and over again. But the ship blowing up never gets old. The cold open, the teaser, is one of the best teasers that they ever did, where the ship blows up and you're unsure what happened. You come back from commercial break and everything's back to normal. It's a really neat directorial accomplishment and a writing accomplishment. They do a lot with this idea, and it's really satisfying, and there's not many problems with it. It's a very clean, easy story that's confusing in how it's constructed, and they did a really good job of holding it together. So number 5 is Cause and Effect. Number 4, Darmok. Season 5, Episode 2. Darmok might be like the quintessential Star Trek story. If someone were to say, like, give me a TNG story that basically sums up the entire series, I think Darmok is probably one of the better ones. The ones that are coming after this are a little more specialized, I guess I'd say. Darmok is purely about getting to know different cultures, different races, and working through differences, which is a big part of TNG and it's a big part of Star Trek. Darmok does it really effectively. It's touching. The language metaphor is clever. Even if it doesn't hold up under scrutiny, it still works on like a poetic level. And you get it's a really good bond that it gets built between Picard and the captain of the alien ship. And the journey that they go on, where they sort of learn to communicate with each other, and Picard understands that the aliens speak in metaphor. It's eminently quotable. Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra, Shaka when the walls fell. It has all these great sort of nerdy Star Trek lines that are quotable in a lot of different situations. It's really a clever episode that's touching at the same time, and it's really the show knowing what it's doing and being in full command of what it wants to get done in a storytelling way. So it is number 4, Darmok. Number 3, The Inner Light. It's probably the saddest episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. It's really well made. It's obviously famous. Everyone loves it. It's highly regarded. The story is just really touching. It's really sad. And when you think about what happened in The Inner Light, you really have an appreciation for... It's one of those things that the episode is obviously only 45 minutes, so you don't get a lot of time to spend with it. But once you start thinking about what the episode is trying to say and what actually happened in the episode, which is to live something like 30 years in the span of only a few minutes, and then to snap out of that 30 years and be back right where you were, it's really dark, powerful, and uplifting at the same time. It gives Picard everything that he ever wanted, and then it kind of rips it away, but it leaves him with the memories of it happening. And it's a very sad episode. It's touching, sad, and profound. I'm going to say profound a lot, but these are the profound episodes, I guess. Number 3, The Inner Light. Number 2, Yesterday's Enterprise. Episode 15 of season 3. It holds up really well. It's one of the first episodes, I think, that the show really led you to believe that it was capable of doing something else. It ties into a lot of things. It ties into the history of the franchise. It holds together as an episode. Our podcast co-host Clay would probably disagree about the romance relationship, whether or not that holds up. I think it does. I think it works. It gives Yar a chance at redemption. One of the characters that the first season and the early writers had maybe not failed, but she left under difficult circumstances, and then they failed to write her out of the show properly. So they gave her this as a good callback, and I think it works. It's a very cinematic episode. If you guys haven't seen it, you should check out someone made like a modern trailer of Yesterday's Enterprise with the modern music and modern cuts and everything. And it came out really good. I think that it would actually have been one of the better Star Trek movies if it had been one. It's just really cinematic, and the storytelling is great. Number 2, Yesterday's Enterprise. So that leaves us with number 1, which everyone must be screaming now is Best of Both Worlds. It's episode 26 of season 3 and episode 1 of season 4, the cliffhanger that ended season 3. I'm going to say that part 2 is definitely weaker than part 1. Part 1 is still kind of brilliant. But as a whole, I think that the reason I'd have to put it up here as the number 1 show that Star Trek TNG ever did is that it's certainly an episode that really says that we are different from TOS. And if you go back and you watch a lot of TOS and then you watch early TNG, it really becomes apparent that TNG is just kind of a rebooted remake of TOS in a lot of ways in the early storytelling. It's 100 years later, it's a new crew, new starship, but everything's kind of the same outside of that. It's a lot of the same storytelling. It's a lot of the same ideas going on. It's a lot of the same interactions that the crew have with each other and the role of each of the crew members in the stories that are being told. So they're kind of plugged in, and they're not really in the story in any sort of direct character sense in a lot of ways, just like TOS was. The characters are just there to view a situation and then act according to how their characters are supposed to act, and that's how a lot of TOS episodes and early TNG episodes were. Best of Both Worlds flips that by, the first thing is that it's a Riker episode, even though it's usually probably off the cuff remembered as Picard episode. It's actually a Riker episode, and it's a really good examination of Riker wanting to move forward but not being sure about how he should move forward. And so it's a really good take on getting older and life changes happening to people through the context of this character in this sci-fi show where his captain has been abducted by cyborgs. And I think that the way that it led to the Picard reconciliation with the things that he had done during the Borg attack and everything, it really allowed the show to say, we are a show interested in these characters at this point. And the sci-fi plots are always going to be there, but we need stronger character work in order to make it pull it off. And I think Best of Both Worlds, if it's not the best episode of the show, it's a really important episode for how it did that. The way that it left on a cliffhanger, the way that it sort of changed things up by putting Picard in danger, which is something that never would have happened to Kirk. It was the show saying we are a different show from TOS, and at least in this way, this method of storytelling were better than what TOS was doing. And that's not to say TNG is a better show. TOS did other things better than what TNG does, but TNG finally steps out of the shadow of TOS with Best of Both Worlds, and it became its own thing, which would be for the next 4 seasons after that. So that's it. Number 10, Survivors. 9, Tapestry. 8, Second Chances. 7, All Good Things. 6, Sarek. 5, Cause and Effect. 4, Darmok. 3, The Inner Light. 2, Yesterday's Enterprise. 1, Best of Both Worlds. That's it. That's my top 10 TNG episodes. At least at this very moment in time. It'll probably change as things go forward, and I forget and time passes me by. But that's it for now. I think that's a solid list of 10 episodes to show anybody. I don't know if they'd actually all work without the context of the series, but in my opinion, they're the best ones. If you want a more in-depth look, again, you can look at the best of and worst of videos that I did for each season. Otherwise, check out the podcast, because we're talking about every single episode of Star Trek, and all the links will be in the video description below. Guys, thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.